The reality of being born in France. Beauty and frustration. Being born in France might sound like a dream with its world-class cuisine, beautiful landscapes, and sophisticated lifestyle. But ask the French themselves, and they'll tell you it's not all fresh baguettes and fine wine. For starters, bureaucracy in France is legendary for being slow, confusing, and unnecessarily complicated. Need to apply for a simple document? Prepare for a wild goose chase of forms, stamps, appointments, and offices that are only open for 3 hours a day, but closed for lunch, of course. People joke that you need a PhD in paperwork just to get a driver's license or file taxes. Government workers, called fonctionnaires, are known for their "it's not my problem" attitude, making every interaction feel like you're inconveniencing them by asking them to do their job. Strikes and protests are practically a national sport in France. If it's not the train drivers, it's the teachers, the doctors, or even the garbage collectors. Waking up to find mountains of uncollected trash in the streets or discovering that half the public transport network is shut down is just another Tuesday in France. These strikes often last for weeks, and while French people are proud of their right to protest, it's also a nightmare when you just need to get to work. Need to get to the airport? Too bad. The air traffic controllers are on strike too. Cost of living is another headache. Paris, in particular, is outrageously expensive. Rent is so high that many young people are stuck living with roommates well into their 30s, and tiny, overpriced apartments called chambres de bonne, essentially glorified closets, are rented out for the price of a full house in other countries. Want to eat out? A simple coffee can cost you €5 if you make the mistake of sitting down instead of ordering at the bar. Even in smaller towns, prices for everyday items like cheese, wine, and bread, ironically, aren't as affordable as tourists think. The work culture isn't as glamorous as it seems. While France is famous for its 35-hour work week, what they don't tell you is that if you have a decent-paying job, you'll probably end up working far beyond those hours. You just won't get paid for it. And while French people cherish their 5 weeks of paid vacation, it's not uncommon to return to a mountain of work that somehow waited for you the entire time you were gone. Social attitudes in France can feel cold and unwelcoming to outsiders, and sometimes even to other French people. French people pride themselves on being direct, read brutally honest, so don't expect sugar-coated feedback. Outside of Paris, people are friendlier, but in big cities, expect to feel like you're on your own. If you're a student, you're in for a wild ride. French education is notoriously intense, competitive, and stressful. Students spend years cramming for massive, make-or-break exams like the baccalaureate, the BAC, which essentially determines the rest of their life. If you fail it, you're basically starting over. Higher education is affordable compared to other countries, but the stress and competitiveness make it feel like you're paying with your mental health instead of your wallet. Speaking of mental health, France has a love-hate relationship with therapy. Despite being the land of great philosophers like Sartre and Camus, talking about mental health is still a bit taboo. People are expected to be stoic and just deal with it, especially in the older generations. While mental health services exist, getting access to affordable care can be a struggle. You might be able to see a psychiatrist covered by insurance, but good luck getting an appointment anytime this decade. Burnout is common, but many people suffer in silence because acknowledging mental exhaustion feels like an admission of weakness. Food is sacred in France, but this comes with its own set of problems. Lunch breaks are long, which sounds great, but trying to grab a quick lunch is borderline impossible. If you ask for ketchup in a French restaurant, prepare for death stares from the waiter. Healthcare in France is technically great: universal coverage, affordable medication, and quality hospitals. But the catch? Waiting times. If you need to see a specialist, be prepared to wait weeks or even months for an appointment. Mental health professionals are in even shorter supply, and rural areas have a shortage of doctors entirely. While emergency care is fast, anything non-urgent will test your patience. And while the French healthcare system is better than most, it's still a complicated web of paperwork, reimbursements, and dealing with CPAM, the health insurance bureaucracy, which is so notoriously slow and confusing that it could be classified as its own mental health issue. Politics in France is a whole soap opera. Every president promises reform and change, but the cycle of protests, broken promises, and scandals never ends. People mock Macron as a president for the rich, and every president before him faced the same criticism. Political debates are heated, strikes become blockades, and during election season, expect TV debates to feel more like verbal boxing matches. Every few years, the far-right party led by Marine Le Pen comes dangerously close to winning, and international headlines scream, "Is France about to swing to the far right?" Meanwhile, people protest everything from retirement reform to fuel taxes by setting cars on fire, and somehow the government always seems shocked that people are mad. Weather in France is also a mixed bag. While tourists picture sunny vineyards and breezy coastlines, locals know the reality. Paris is grey, rainy, and gloomy for half the year. The summer heat waves are no joke either, with temperatures regularly hitting 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And since most French buildings, especially old apartments, have no air conditioning, people are basically forced to sleep in their own sweat. In the winter, heating can be just as unreliable, especially with rising energy costs. And while rural villages might look charming, many are becoming ghost towns as young people flee to cities, leaving behind aging populations and shuttered shops. And of course, there's the infamous French superiority complex. While the French pride themselves on culture, fashion, and philosophy, outsiders often see it as arrogance. The French will fiercely defend their language, correcting your French grammar even if you're clearly just a tourist trying your best. If you mispronounce croissant, be prepared for a look of disgust. Even when they're on vacation in other countries, French tourists have a reputation for being snobby, acting like their way of life is the correct one. Ironically, many young French people also want to leave the country for better jobs abroad, despite claiming that France is the best. So, while being born in France might sound romantic, the reality is a mix of bureaucratic nightmares, rude waiters, strikes on strikes, overpriced everything, and relentless existential dread. Sure, you get fresh bread every day, and yes, healthcare is technically free, but you'll also spend half your life waiting, queuing, protesting, or filling out forms in triplicate. It's a country of beauty and frustration, philosophy and strikes, wine and waiting. The only thing more French than loving France is complaining about it, and in that sense, being born in France guarantees you'll always have something to rant about.